Welcome everyone to BrowserStack Talks, conversations that turn testing points into playbooks. I'm your host, David, and on this episode, I'm thrilled to be joined by someone who deeply understands everyday realities of software engineering and testing. We'll be delving into a topic that resonates with every engineer, dealing with frustrations in our work and how it impacts the quality of the software we build. Joining us today, we have Katja Obring, a seasoned expert in software development and testing. Katja, please introduce yourself.
Hello, hi, I'm Kat. Thanks for inviting me, David. Pleasure to be here. So I have been working in software development for about the last 20 years. And before that, I had a career as a chef. So I changed careers quite drastically. I started in customer support. Well, it was called as a liaison. It was a mix of customer support and community management. And then fairly quickly, my manager became a little bit annoyed with me because I kept pointing out every single bug I came across. And so he encouraged me to apply for an open QA position, which I did. And then they gave me that position. And the rest is history, as they say, right? So I've worked for some fairly big companies. I have worked for fairly small and early stage startups. I have done both. I generally prefer the smaller side, but both have interesting problems to solve. I did a bit of consulting. And these days I mostly offer courses for people who want to learn more about how they can use specific metrics from their own context to improve their testing or generally the quality in their teams, and have conversations that are being taken seriously, right? So how you can bring all of that together.
And I think that's going to segue really nicely into kind of some of the things we're going to be talking about, because I think everyone knows that they need to collect metrics, and that metrics are kind of the bread and butter of a modern engineering manager and engineers. But sometimes collecting those metrics can be frustrating. And some of the kind of frustrations lead to kind of annoyances with teammates, and kind of impact how people can kind of interact with this. Like, from these metrics and everything that you've been doing, because you have an extensive career, what are the kind of common sources of these, like, metrics that they want, and then metrics that they get frustrated by?
That's an interesting question. So I think metrics, people always want metrics that give them easy answers. And I think very few metrics do that. Mm-hmm. And I think that is at the same time then where this frustration lies, right? People don't necessarily are hugely in favor of discovering the story metrics tell. They, like I say, they want quick answers. They want to know, is something successful, for example, which is always a tricky question to answer by a metric, because what does successful mean? So you first have to go and define exactly what you're trying to understand, and then design a metric that actually measures indicators of that success, because we all know it, right? Success is not that straightforward. And the frustration, again, is often in where metrics are either misinterpreted, or what I often see is when metrics become goals. Mm-hmm. And that is a really, really dangerous road to go through, because metrics give you information that needs interpreting. They can never be a goal.
Yeah, I've seen that extensively, and kind of the metric that becomes a goal that I get the most frustrated by, and I always kind of, whenever I speak to people about it, it's the age-old one of, like, code coverage as an example, right? Like, we must hit 80%. It's like, great, 80% of what? And how do you know that 80% is actually doing the right thing, right? Like, and so I think a lot of people can relate to that quite nicely, in that, you know, especially I kind of feel like I'm having a bit of PTSD when you said, like, metrics are now becoming no, it's all good. Metrics is becoming a goal, and you're like, you know, that's fine, but some metrics are useful as indicators to another metric. I think that's kind of one of the things that you were suggesting there, like, because you need the interpretation, right? Like, and some things are not like a definite one-to-one.
Absolutely. I mean, I love metrics. I use them, everywhere. And but metrics, like I said, metrics are always only a part of the whole story. And metrics are only useful, if you are very clear on the question you're trying to answer, and very clear on how you can interpret the numbers. Metrics tend to be numbers, right? Not all are necessarily, but what you need to define clearly what success means to you in this context, right? So, for example, to stick with your code coverage, if you say you count your code, you check your code coverage, you come up with, okay, we only have 40% code coverage, right? And you have maybe a new leader come in and say, oh, this is horrible, it must be 80%. Then that is a frustration in itself, because like you say, you kind of need to look at what those 40% are actually doing. You need to look at your code base, because sometimes there is code that it just doesn't make sense to write unit tests for them. I don't need a unit test on a constructor.
Yeah.
Right? So, and maybe your code base just happens to be a code base that doesn't need 80% of unit test coverage, because a lot of the code doesn't really actually exercise any logic. Right? So that is a perfectly valid scenario. So you really need to look at what you're trying to achieve, why you're trying to achieve it, and what this metric tells you in the context it is derived from. And then, of course, you don't want to go and say, okay, we are currently at 40%, we want to get to 80%, right? Maybe it is a better approach to say, okay, we have 40%, we have discovered that is really a little bit low, and we have areas of code that are business critical, that don't have any unit tests at all, and we want to start working on that. And then maybe you want to derive some goals from that, namely say no new code goes in without unit test coverage is always a great first step. Right? If you want to clear up your rubbish, stop throwing more rubbish onto the heap.
Yeah.
Right? And then maybe you have time to go back and fix some of that and say, okay, maybe we bring in a story per sprint to write missing unit tests.
Yeah.
So you need to be a little bit more specific than the whole lofty goals of, oh no, it needs to be this.
So what is do you have a basic framework for people when you go to them, so that they can figure out what success is at a high level? Like, because everyone, they can, because everything can be gamed, right? But at the end of the day, you're either got vanity metrics, you've got this coming in, that coming in, right? But is there a general framework that you can say to people, like, don't go down this road, or if you go down this road, there be dragons, right? But and you need to be aware of them.
Yeah. So I'm not a huge fan of the high level goals. I am very much in favor of picking a problem and then starting to look in how you can solve that problem. And again, in that context, I like to start small, because I think a lot of, or at least in my career, I have seen a lot of really ambitious, I worked in a consultancy, digital transformation, quality transformation, all of that, right? I have seen these things. There are multi-year plans. They are very, very expensive in the planning. They're very expensive in the execution. You probably bring in some very expensive experts from the outside, right? And in the end, often they fail, or they don't achieve what they are supposed to achieve, is maybe a better way to put it, because they are so big, because there is so much change that needs to happen. And really my approach is rather, on a team level, look at something that is really making life hard for your team today, right? Maybe that is, I don't know, an annoyance in your CI/CD pipeline. Maybe a certain step that doesn't reliably start automatically as it should. Maybe test execution takes a little bit long, although that can be a bigger problem, but it is also a solvable problem, right? Define your problem define, and then look around you and say, okay, what metrics can I collect to actually prove that this is a problem, not just to me, but to more people around me?
Yeah.
What proof can I find here? And that is not necessarily a super big dashboard with all of the logs and outputs and so on and so forth. That can be quite straightforward. Once you have that, have conversations with people. Talk to them, right? And say, okay, I have observed this and this happening. Does this affect your work? And if so, how does it affect your work? So put together a little bit of basically a list of evidence, right? Mm-hmm. Talk to stakeholders within this. Maybe it is a problem to you, maybe it is a problem to one other person in the team, but maybe business priority really is somewhere else and they don't really care right now. It's going to be very hard to find buy-in, to get buy-in, to spend time on solving that problem if nobody cares.
Yeah.
Right. So once you have done that, use your metrics to define what would better look like, right? Mm-hmm. So, I don't know. My automated tests run for 45 minutes every time they are running in the pipeline. That is too long, right? Yeah. So personally, I'm not a super patient person. I kind of draw the line at 10 minutes. Enough time to walk away, get a coffee, come back. But yeah. I want to come back to tests that have finished running at that point. And that is already stretching it. So ideally, it would be much shorter. So define what better looks like then. Okay, we're doing 45 minutes now. Maybe we cannot go from 45 to 10, but maybe we can go from 45 to 30.
Yeah.
Right? And maybe we don't need to run all of them. Maybe there are different approaches to this. So define what success look like and then solve that one problem. And if you do that often enough, then you will have your digital transformation in the end, right?
Yeah.
And it's much easier, I think, to get buy-in from other people. Sorry, that was a little bit longer than you expected, Hope.
No, and I think that's fine. I don't think I could have seen it better, really. And then, like when you were talking, I was having flashes of like the XKCD comic. Like it's compiling. When people telling people to get back to. Yeah, it's classic. It's great. But it's kind of why like BrowserStack is a company for doing what it does, because it allows people to scale up to get those 10-minute things. I think it's important that we still strive for that. I remember working at Mozilla and I'd do a push from the code I changed, and like 3, 4, 5 hours later I might get a result back. But Mozilla works at a different scale compared to everyone else, right? Like because there's a really cool website, treeherder.mozilla.org. You can see all of their CI, right? And the matrix for kind of testing and building is just extensive, right? Because desktop apps are so much harder than desktop and mobile apps are so much harder than just a website. And so
it's true.
Yeah. No, I think that's really good, and I think it kind of helps people understand some of the, like what they're looking at, and then I think you kind of alluded that they need to sell it to people, their leadership, things like that, and I've been speaking to kind of like Simon Pryor and others who are like, Vernon Richards also said this, is like the testers should learn the art of selling, and it's kind of selling themselves but also selling the work that they do, not necessarily selling a product, right? Like they are their product, but and I think what you said there kind of just reminded me of those times where it's like, actually, you need to be your biggest advocate, and again, it can be hard.
Yeah, I mean, bug advocacy is certainly a thing, right? And I think that testers maybe it is in the nature of our work, right? We have a tendency to talk about things that can be a little bit intangible to a lot of people. Ideally, if as a tester I do my job well, right, then nothing much happens. How do you sell the value of nothing happening?
Yeah.
Right? That is very hard. However, if I do my job well, I can also help a team move faster because they are more confident that what they're releasing is actually working as intended.
Yeah.
And I can solve many problems around that and help the team solve many problems around that. Because one thing are testers good at, spotting problems.
Yeah.
Right? And that is not necessarily only spotting problems with your product, with your code, but that can be all sorts of levels of work, really. So I personally, and I'm not a huge fan of the term selling here, but I think the best selling, to stick with that, happens when you have to offer a solution to a genuine problem somebody else has. Because then you don't need to sell much. You just need to let them know that you can solve their problem.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? And that is why I always recommend people start by identifying very clear problems. And that is not, I don't know, our code reviews take too long. That is surely a problem, but that is not specific enough. You want a very specific thing, right? So maybe pare it down one level. Why are they taking so long? Is it the actual review that takes so long? Or does it take very long until somebody picks up the review? Do you have multiple people who can do these reviews? Or is it just one person that we're always waiting for? Peel. I look at it a bit like an onion, right? Peel the layers back until you see something that is very clear, very specific. Because once it's specific, then you can start talking about how you can solve it.
Again, everything you're saying is, I feel maybe you've lived the exact same life as me, where it's just like I've had so many reviews before, different companies, and they just get stuck, and you get frustrated, like you're waiting, and then eventually you do get the review, and it's just like, oh great, I've got to go fix all these things. I can't remember what I wrote like at the beginning of the week, when it's towards the end, before it then has to go back for review. And the real problem here was that there was only 4 or 5 people who could do the reviews, and they weren't training. They didn't have the time to train new people up, which then led to kind of this like frustration in a different sense, right? Because I think kind of a lot of people get frustrated with a lot of the way development works, from development to testing to product management, because like they don't have enough agency, or they don't feel they have enough agency, I think is the way to handle that. I
totally agree. And that is something I often hear is specifically from testers who have, so around them, I often hear this when people can get to what I would call the mid-level, right? So juniors often are quite enthusiastic about everything, and they get their kicks out of finding bugs, which is great, and we all do to some extent. But if you've been doing this for a few years, you kind of realize that a lot of the bugs stem not from people making mistakes, which is fine, and that just happens, and that will always happen, but they stem from systemic problems in the development process. So it is quite natural to, at some point, look at those problems and wanting to fix those problems, right? And that is why I started where I started, because if you're at that point, you then will need to get buy-in. You will need buy-in for time away from what people perceive as your core competency, right? Maybe distracting other people from what they should be doing, right? So all of that kind of needs buy-in from people, and the only way to achieve that, in my opinion, really is to demonstrate this is where we are now, this is what this is costing us, and this is where we could be if we could solve this problem. This is why this is business relevant, because it is costing us money.
Yeah.
Because that is a language suddenly everybody understands.
Yeah. And I think kind of, if you've got your success criteria set up carefully, everyone is individual, and that needs to be reinforced, I think, kind of what you were saying earlier. You've got your kind of development team, they know what success means, because ideally success should be the same for the company, right? And you've got to have micro versions of that success that goes to each person, each team. But kind of you're all after the same thing at the end of the day, which is kind of company growth, you get a salary, you get to do your things, right? Like that is the be-all. And I think it's important that people don't necessarily see testing as a last line of defense. If testers do their job really well and developers do their job very well, everything just kind of happens, and you kind of go, oh, I don't need that last part because they're not catching anything. But there's a lot of work that is happening there, conversations, things like that, at the whole line. And even before the whole shift left, I kind of feel a lot of people were doing shift left without kind of giving it a name or a brand or whatever. And they were able to have constructive conversations. Obviously, looping back to some of the frustrations that I've seen, is that there were times where developers go, well, you know, you're just there to catch my mistakes. It's like, which is a bit unfair on anyone, right? Because now it adds workload to, I think, a lot of people. Is that part of how you speak to people around what success looks like?
Well, yes. So this is a particular pet peeve of mine. This kind of last line of defense. Partially because I think it is not helpful to anybody, right? It isn't helpful to the product, because if any malfunctions actually make it, any defects make it to this last line, then there is a lot of fail-safes before that have clearly either not been implemented or have failed, right? It is generally really frustrating for this last line, the tester, because you automatically put yourself, and I know some people thrive on that, right? I know there are entire training schools that build around that, but you put yourself in a constant opposition to the rest of your team. Very few people are happy in that position. Again, I'm not saying everybody, because I'm sure some people enjoy this, but it's very rare. And it's very rare to be successful, because how do you, again, we talked about success criteria, how do you define that? No bugs in production? That is never going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? So that is a really, really difficult thing to achieve. So I am very much, and have always been, so my first QA role that I talked about earlier was the only time that I worked in a team where at some point I was assigned to a new project and somebody sent me a 20-page document of specifications, right? But no code had been written, anything, right? So there were just this pile of kind of specs. And then, well, you can start writing tests with this. I'm like, hey, I don't know how that works. I was also fairly new to the job, and I decided I'll just make it up as I go along, right? What do you do?
Yeah.
So I did write some test cases based on that, and really realized very quickly, as soon as actual code was present, that I could throw all of that away, because things were just not like they were supposed to be, and what I had written covered only a tiny fraction of what we actually needed testing. And I thought that this is a bit crap, isn't it? So I kind of stopped doing that. Lucky for me, however, that company also, even 20 years ago, worked agile, and we then in the team made a shift and we just started working differently, and did the shift left without kind of really having a name for it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just think it is one of the problems, I think, with those frustrations around that, is that quite often you still have a systemic issue where different team members, or maybe different teams, have different success criteria, which are often at odds with each other. Mm-hmm. And a developer whose success criteria is maybe how many tickets can they release every sprint, that is a very different success criteria from how stable is the stuff they push into testing.
Yeah.
Right? So if you set that up to be a conflicting goal, the tester is the last line and the developer is the one who just cares up to that line, because they are incentivized to care about other stuff.
Yeah.
Then automatically that leads to frustration on both sides. Even though there is often, it's one of those memes, right? Where the tester is the hero who has protected the customer from the bad code. There were
it's
much
funny
better ways
it's true.
to do that. I had much better ways to do that. And whilst it may be flattering if a developer tells you, yeah, but you keep saving my butt, right? I don't think it is flattering. It just means you're not spending your time where you should be spending your time.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
I think your opinion needs to be shouted from rooftops, truthfully. Right? Like, I've spent my career as a engineering leader, and I've had people go, I don't need to write tests, we've got QA. And I go, okay, cool. So when it comes to bonus time, I don't need to give you a bonus because I have no way of measuring how the quality of your code, that you've not created bugs and you've things like this, and not potentially lost as customers. And they were like, sorry, what? I went, well, you've just said quality is not your problem. So I'll give you a bonus to others, and then if you want to come back and reevaluate how we're doing things, let's do it. Let's have a discussion. But if you're making unilateral decisions, then I can make unilateral decisions, and it's going to impact people. And they were like, oh. I went, okay. So should we take a step back, look at it again? How do I ever measure that you're doing good work? If I'm having to wait on someone else to tell me you've done a good job? I need it's a bit of both. And suddenly people look at it in a very different light in that way, I think, because they go, oh, so it's actually about how good I am. Yes. You could be churning out 1,000 lines of code a day, a week, whatever. Doesn't mean you're actually good at what you're doing. Like, and we see this with AI, I think.
Oh God, yes. Yes. Yes.
Because I saw a thing. Jack Dorsey, ex-CEO of Twitter, has put out a thing on Block about how he's vibe coding these days. And it's just like, okay, cool. But to give him his due, one of the things he said is like, oh, you got to make sure you're constantly testing. And I was like, okay, that's not what I expected.
It's pretty good, yeah.
Yeah.
I think, so I think because we're currently, at the top of the hype cycle, right? The trough of disillusionment will follow. We know that. We know how that goes. But people tend to forget that all of those amazing AI tools are just that. They're tools. And you know what they say, right? A fool with a tool is still a fool.
Yep.
So AI can be amazing and really helpful. I mean, I'm a one-person business. I am really glad about every help I can get that helps me do my tasks more efficiently. But only if I know I am the only one who knows what good looks like.
Yeah.
And AI can only help me if I constantly, I know what I want to get out of it. I know what I put into it.
Yeah.
And I know what good looks like. Again, so I need to be constantly evaluating whether I do that in code, where tests are exactly the right way to do that, whether that is writing, where I write something and maybe I use an AI to edit this with some very specific prompts. That can be super helpful, right? Yeah. English is not my mother tongue. I'm pretty good at it, I like to think.
Definitely.
But, it's by no means perfect. So having somebody proofread my stuff and point out grammar mistakes to me and maybe make suggestions how I have a tendency, as you may have noticed, to have very long sentences that go on and on and on and on and on and on. That's not helpful in writing, right?
Yeah.
So all of that can be super helpful.
Yeah.
That's it.
No, I think that's good, and I think it's I like the a fool with a tool is at the end of the day just a fool. I think is very fitting, and I think there's a lot of that going on at the moment where everyone's like, oh, I've got to use this, and like on the BrowserStack Discord, so we have a community there where we can talk about anything, right? It's not just about products. And so I was like, oh, I'm moving away from Selenium to Playwright because like the AI seems to understand it a bit better, and I don't have to go through different translation layers. And I'm like, okay, but you're doing all this stuff. You're not actually understanding how, firstly, JavaScript, the web, browsers work, and you're moving from one automation tool to another automation tool, still not understanding the fundamentals. And it's those fundamentals that are going to come back and really bite you when you and you'll get like flaky tests, and if you got like tooling that kind of spots when you've got flakiness or things like that in your CI/CD pipeline, right? Then and you go, oh, why is this? It must be the tool. It's like, no. Again, you've not built in that resilience, the culture of quality or learning or things like that. That I can say it as an elder millennial, that like there are times where it's like we had to learn by making mistakes along the way, and I think it's important that we do that and then grow, learn where quality is, and then carry on.
I think everybody learns by making. That's how you learn, right? So that is why you don't really learn new stuff or get good at something if you're not happy to be a little bit shit first.
Yeah.
Right? So it may not be the most appealing prospect you have to do something and be not very good at it and keep, fail a little bit. But if you keep going, then next time you will be a little bit less bad and a little bit less bad and so on and so forth. And at some point you may actually be good. But it is a process. There is no way of cutting that process short.
Yeah.
No matter how much knowledge you can immediately access these days by using the internet or an AI tool, it doesn't really matter. You can use those to improve your learning. Absolutely, and I love that. I love taking a code base, for example, if I work with a team and I don't know much about it and I'm new to that, and throw that into, I don't know, Cursor, for example, which happens to be my tool of choice often, right? I say, okay, tell me what's going on here. And it's surprisingly good at analyzing a code base. That doesn't mean I would go and say, okay, write me a mobile app that, I don't know, tells me the current price of tomatoes all over York. They will probably do not too badly at that, to be fair, but you get the drift. Yeah. I think explaining is, again, keeping in mind that you will also get wrong answers, you will get hallucinations, right? You will all get all sorts of funky stuff.
Yeah. It's the hallucinations is the one I find hilarious, and a lot of the times when I've been looking through code, like, and I do a bit of vibe coding these days. So I like to be down with the kids. And a lot of the times where I look at it and go, what were you even thinking in the first place to be writing that? No, let's throw that all away, start again. So, and I think kind of one of the things you've just said there, it just reminded me of, like, it's an acronym I share with anyone who reports to me, because I like to give them enough space to make mistakes, because then they learn. And the acronym that I use is FAIL, and it stands for First Attempt in Learning. Okay. Right? And I found it quite good. It's not one that I've created. I know I found it somewhere, and so I'm not going to take any ownership of it. But it's one that's stuck with me with my career, because I think, like you said, you've got to be bad at something to figure out how to get good at it, right?
Yeah, I heard the story about Thomas Edison. I don't know if it's true or not, but supposedly he said something along the lines of, I haven't failed 10,000 times. I have just found 10,000 ways in which it doesn't work. Yeah, it's the same thing. Exactly.
And it's important that I think kind of teams foster a world of, like, kind of resilience and things like that by allowing people to fail, and and by resilience I mean kind of supporting people when they make mistakes, don't chastise them, but also from a technological point of view, if something's going to fail, allow it to fail gracefully, handle those situations better, so at the end of the day your end user isn't aware of it. You can still make those mistakes, experiment, learn, and move on. I do think it creates interesting testing when you've
It
got to create
certainly does.
those tools. But I think it's very worthwhile.
Absolutely, yes. And failing gracefully is certainly one of my PTS moments where I thought for many years, one day I'm going to write a book about the difference between useful and useless error messages.
The latter written 100% by Microsoft.
Uh-huh.
The former written purely by the Rust compiler team. I don't know if you've ever used Rust, but
Very briefly.
the compiler error messages are a gold standard in how to write error messages, right? Like they're like, you've made this mistake. Should you have done X, Y, and Z? We think you should have. Here's a link to a web page that explains this whole thing, and you're like, that's how
nice.
people should be doing it, right? It's like Rust is an incredibly hard language to get your head around because it's got like the way it handles like memory and things like that.
Mm.
And once you understand this by learning from your error messages, you're like, oh, I can actually go do stuff. Where I've worked, I'm sure you've done this too, done a bit of like COM programming in the past, and you just get this like random error message, and the error message is like 17. You're like, okay, what does 17 mean? And then you go through like MSDN and look for everything. You're like,
Yeah.
This is not great. Like it doesn't even explain when you find the error code, right? Like it doesn't actually explain how to fix it.
It is still better than the my personal favorite always for everything is an error occurred. Yeah, no fucking kidding. I can't see that.
Yeah. Although an error has occurred and it's just got an OK button. You're like,
Yeah, exactly. So what am I supposed to do with this now? I can see that it didn't do what I thought it was going to happen.
oh no, this has been really good. So Kat, we're coming towards the end of the show. The next thing that I like to do with all guests is a quick fire round where I'll ask you a few questions. You give us a one sentence answer where possible, so that you on different things, and then there's about 5 of them, and then we'll but I do reserve the right that if you say something really interesting, I might just prod you for a bit more on that answer.
Okay.
So are you ready?
Yeah.
What is your favorite debugging technique?
To be honest with you, I've never been particularly great at debugging. So I just follow the error through in my IDE as much as I can. These days, like as I said before, I often will take the whole thing and stick it in cursor and see what that comes up with. And that I found really, really helpful. Worst case scenario, I find somebody who is much better at coding than I am and try to pair with them on a session.
Great. One non-technical book every engineer should read.
I have a long list. I'm going to go, however, for Atomic Habits by James Clear, which is basically a book about how you can improve anything, really, by making it 1% better every day. So if you take whatever you like and make it 1% better every day, then you will be a whole lot better by the end of the year. But this 1% improvement is not a big step, or such a big step that it becomes really hard for you.
That's a good book. I have read it. It's very good. Underhyped engineering skill.
I don't really know. I am going to say not taking things personally. I think the famous one, or the favorite here, is often communication. I think modern software engineers are much, much better at communication than many people give them credit for.
Mm-hmm.
But I think not taking things personally and being clear that what is being criticized is not you, just the output of something that you created, is really, really valuable skill to have.
I agree. Most common testing mistake that you see regularly?
Too many tests. Testing everything just because you can, rather than testing what you need to test because you want to prove something specific.
Cool. Final question. You've already told us that you did a career change into testing. But if you were to stop working in the software space, what career do you think you would do next?
These days, I think I would probably become maybe a knitting teacher.
Nice. That's very, very cool. Awesome. Thank you for your time today, Kat. This has been an incredibly insightful conversation. I've had a really fun time talking about everything, kind of navigating all the different ways, but it's nice to see that like you still have a bit of love for kind of the industry in engineering and testing. Thank you so much for joining today.
No, thank you for inviting me. It was great.
Great. So to everyone, if you're an engineer or tester, I hope kind of Kat's insights have been helpful and giving you some valuable insights and perspectives. It's not about kind of solving everything all at once. It's about kind of, as Kat said from her favorite book, making that 1% change each time. I think that's really important. So Kat, if people wanted to follow you or kind of see what you're discussing next, where's the best place for them to find you?
The easiest way is LinkedIn. I am very active on LinkedIn, and there are links to my other stuff when there is other stuff to look at.
Brilliant. And to everyone, thank you for joining. Please make sure that you subscribe to BrowserStack Talks so you get an update for the next episode. And we hope to see you there. Thank you.